Welcome to County Voice, the Alberta Ag Podcast, a regional look at agriculture issues, events, and news. Here is your host, Gemma Pasquarelli.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. On today's podcast, we're focusing on the beautiful county of Clearwater. This county is home to an incredibly unique mammal, which we'll be touching on later in the podcast. Other topics up for discussion today include livestock protection and fun things to do in Clearwater County. I'm very pleased to welcome Matt Martinson, Fieldman of Clearwater County, to the County Voice, the Alberta Ag Podcast. Thanks for joining us today, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. Why don't we start off and have you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Awesome. Yeah, as you mentioned, I'm the Ag Fieldman of Clearwater County, or the Director of Agriculture and Community Services. I live and farm in the county, and farming's my passion. And when I'm not doing that, we like to be outside in the mountains or along the river fishing or just kind of out in the grass. And so, the county is definitely where I like to live and recreate and enjoy my time for sure.
Sounds like you're in the perfect place for you and your family.
For sure. Yeah, there's no place else I'd rather be, that's for sure.
It's wonderful. Is there anything else that you love about Clearwater County that you want to express?
Yeah, I think probably my most favorite part of Clearwater County, and why I think a lot of people enjoy it so much is our diversity. And, we're big, and that allows us to be diverse. Clearwater County is 18,900 square kilometers. That's just
wow.
That's just over 4.6 million acres. And within that 4.6 million acres, of course, only 12,000 people live. That doesn't seem like a lot. And it certainly isn't from a density perspective, but the people here are definitely, very hardy because it's a big county and there's lots going on. But as I mentioned, that diversity and what we see here in Clearwater County is we see a lot of different landscapes from east to west, north to south. And some of those landscapes include the parkland on the east side. But as we move west, we see rolling foothills. And then we get into some alpine and subalpine ecosystems and, in the mountainous regions, as well as, the beautiful, rich river valleys that also exist there. So, that diversity is really shaped what happens here in Clearwater County from an industrious perspective. So we have diverse industries as well. Certainly agriculture, my passion, but also literally the bread and butter here in Clearwater County. But also we've got a really thriving oil and gas industry, forestry sector, and then of course tourism recreation as an industry, but also as a pastime and pursuit here for us locals as well. So
so very diverse.
We're very blessed with that diversity. And I think you'll hear me say that word a lot throughout the podcast because it really permeates into everything we do here. And specifically in agriculture, we see that same diversity that was really created to a certain extent as the glaciers scraped past us. It really contributed to our diverse soils. So we're very fortunate to have some very rich, diverse soils. We have black Chernozemic soils, we have dark gray Chernozemic soils, and then we have some light gray Luvacilic soils. So, that certainly is sort of set the table for the diverse agriculture pursuits that we see here in Clearwater County.
Yeah, so much diversity there. This podcast brought to you by Clearwater County. To find out more about the county, go to clearwatercounty.ca. Matt, tell me some of the fun things to do in Clearwater.
Yeah, obviously farming's super fun, and that's why a lot of us do it. Maybe not always, but it's in our blood. But beyond that, of course, we're really blessed with a lot of outdoor recreation opportunities. So you'll find lots of good fishing here, and certainly some good fly fishing on some of our small trout streams in the mountains. We get lots of ATV or equestrian trail riding opportunities here. And then, just the general hiking and skiing and just all those types of things that we see in the mountain areas. So, my personal favorite thing to do when I'm not farming or or working here at the county is I like to fish, here in the county. Just find lots of nice fishing holes that I'm not going to share with you.
You want to keep that all to yourself?
That's right.
It does sound like it's extremely diverse and so beautiful. Let's touch on just a little bit more about the Clearwater County itself. Just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I touched a little bit about what we kind of do here on a high level, but as we focus a little bit more on agriculture and some of the things that we see here. Beef production, specifically the cow-calf sector, definitely makes up the significant portion of our 1,000 farms.
Okay.
And so, that's really one of the main sectors. But we also have other livestock pursuits that happen here, including, the beef I mentioned. But we also see beef, bison, and sheep feedlots here in the county. And we have other primary production within the livestock sector beyond beef, including sheep, goats, bison, hogs, dairy, horses, and then other livestock. And we're going to touch on some unique livestock later.
Can't wait for that one. Yeah.
That'll be exciting. So, livestock's definitely king around here. But as I mentioned, we're very diverse. And so we have a very, very established annual crop sector as well. It's well represented. And actually, it's the growth industry from an agriculture sector here. And we grow barley, oats, wheat, canola, peas, rye, faba beans, as well as other annual crops for sale. And then we see some triticale and corn grown for forage production. And that kind of leads me into another significant sector within our agriculture industry. And it's more of a support sector, but it's important. And that's the forage sector. And perennial forage crops are grown quite heavily in the county. And of course, they support the livestock that I mentioned earlier. So we're growing a lot of alfalfa, timothy, brome, orchard grass, clover, and other forages, mainly for sale as hay, but we'll also see a little bit of standing crops sold for silage as well. And that industry, maybe understated, generally is so important to our livestock sector. Without it, we wouldn't have cattle fed.
Okay. And tell us about, a little bit more about the diverse soils and ecology of Clearwater County.
Yeah. So, I talked a little bit about our specific soils and those are really functions of two things. As I mentioned, the glacier scraped past us and deposited those different soils, but it really was factor that created some of our uniqueness was the mountains. And so we definitely benefit from having the mountains right here. When we look at sort of the amount of precipitation we get, we're in a bit of a rain curtain. And that's why we're able to grow, the annual crops we do. Even with our short growing season, we get, that mountain traps some warmth in, but it also creates that rain curtain, which drops precipitation as the southeast winds blow moisture up against the mountains and the northwest systems push it back over our fields. So, it's a really cool area to see when it comes to weather, because we got the mountains and we've got southeast and northwest systems always kind of meeting. But there is a downside that comes, and we are in a hail belt that does kind of create some issues for us, especially on the annual crop sector, but can be damaging to the forage crop sector as well.
I really do think the key word here when we're talking about Clearwater County is diversity. There's just everything that you're talking about, from what you like to do on your off time, right down to the soil, there's so much diversity. So I think that just makes Clearwater so beautiful and so interesting. And you did touch on the agriculture industry. So how does the ag industry fit into this large, diverse county?
Yeah, I mean, really, you could describe agriculture as the anchor tenant, or, the sort of one of the really, good old boys up the block that's always here to help out. We definitely have lots of other activities going on, but it seems like, agriculture sort of underpins and is the glue for everything. And certainly, within our landscape, we see a lot of acreages where, the oil and gas and forestry workers live, but they live right amongst agriculture. And certainly they're just a part of it as the farmers are. So yeah, it's definitely a place where you see a lot of different activities and you see a lot of different people, and really one of the the sort of the fabric in between all that is definitely agriculture for sure.
Just keeps everyone connected.
Definitely, and also fed too.
Very important. County Voice, the Alberta Ag Podcast, sponsored by Clearwater County, brings a regional focus on agricultural issues, events, and news. Matt, one thing unique to Clearwater County is your yak herd. How did this herd come to be?
Yeah, so we're very excited to house what was, at one time, and I believe likely still is, only one of two domestic yak herds in Alberta.
It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, definitely. And it exists in one of the most beautiful parts of our county, in my opinion, which is north of Leslieville and the rolling hills. You go up there and you really feel like you're in ranch country, expecting to see lots of cattle, which you do, but then you roll over a hill and you see a herd of yaks. And it's quite neat for those that don't see that every day.
Of course.
And of course, they're not a native species to Alberta. And of course, there is two species of yaks. There are the native yak that tend to be, indigenous to northern areas. But then there's domestic yaks who have been bred and domesticated to be more suited for agriculture production.
Okay. And so tell us a little bit more about the herd that we have here.
Yeah. So I think, the farmer that raises them is certainly been involved in livestock for a long time. And in part, I think, what they're trying to achieve with working with yaks is, yaks are very feed efficient. They're very winter hardy. And, they do produce a very high quality meat, which is very similar to beef, but probably more similar to bison in it being a little more lean. And so it's very delicious and sought after, certainly in, fancier restaurants, but, definitely somebody that's looking for a little leaner product for sure. So I think, that's sort of the value of raising yaks. And I think a lot of the same reasons why people would be interested in raising yaks are the same reasons why people raise bison. But yaks are a smaller animal and a little easier to handle. They're a little more docile, a little less mean. And so, if you're interested in raising bison, but maybe a little more intimidated about the size of them and the aggressiveness of them, yaks are a really good opportunity to sort of in between, the bison sort of production.
And so has anyone come forward showing an interest in that you know of wanting to raise yak?
Oh, I think people are kind of kicking tires all the time on ways that we can, raise meat a little more efficiently.
Right.
Raise meat a little less, with a little less hands off than we do with cattle. I'm not going to suggest that yaks will replace beef in X amount of years, but I do think there'll be a little niche market that they can carve out. And I think they'll coexist in, a system right now that includes beef and bison and other livestock. And we are seeing people that are entering or want to enter the livestock industry choose more smaller and more easier to handle animals like sheep and goats rather than cattle, because cattle and bison, larger livestock, they're a little intimidating. They're a little more risky, and they maybe aren't the best choice for somebody that doesn't have a whole bunch of experience to try to get into. So that can be limiting for the livestock sector. But I think these smaller livestock opportunities like yak, there'd be a growth market, especially for people that are new to the industry and want to get into it.
Yeah, so it just adds a different idea of what you can raise. Matt, can you tell us just an interesting fact that maybe no one knows about yaks that you find really interesting?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I find interesting about yaks, as I mentioned before, there's the two species, the domesticated and the wild. And if you look at the wild yak species, they actually only calved every other year. And so, that's one thing that we've changed a little bit as we've bred the domestic versions. They do produce on a year basis. Of course, that is more cost effective if you're raising an animal to be able to get a return from it on a year basis. So, and I think one of the other things that's very interesting is that yaks are very well suited to be draft animals as well. And certainly back in the day, cattle or oxen were used as draft animals, but yaks were certainly more sought after. Even though they were a smaller animal, they were hardier and better at pulling. And even today, in certain mountainous areas and certain very, very cold, rugged climates, you'll still see yaks being used as draft animals, especially in parts of the mountainous areas of Asia and alpine areas. So, they're definitely not a single-use animal. They're definitely still in the mix for doing a few things.
Well, it sounds like they would feel at home here then.
They do, and that's why there's such a good fit here.
That's great. The County Voice, the Alberta Ag Podcast, is a Rural Roots Canada production. If you like this podcast, then check out The Podcast Farm, home to ag-based podcasts from across the country. Matt, let's get into a little bit of detail about some livestock protection. What animals do you commonly see attack livestock in your county?
Yeah, well, you talk to some farmers and they would suggest what animals don't attack their livestock. We have a long list of predator species here, and that's just a bit of a symptom of where we're at, and I think most of us would never trade that, for anything, because with the mountains and the foothills comes things like wolves, cougars, bears of both species, both black and grizzly, and then on a minor extent, coyotes, which is a predator almost every county deals with. But for us, coyotes are probably the least of our worries. We certainly see the most predation coming from wolves.
Okay. And what's the management program that the county has in place to protect livestock from what obviously is a lot of different animals?
Yeah, so we're very, very active in working with producers to protect their livestock and implement management practices, specifically proactive management practices. Proactive management practices are the best. So it really depends a little bit about what species of livestock we're dealing with and what species of predator. But in a general sense, for all species of livestock and all species of predators, the best thing you can do to keep predators from damaging or destroying your livestock is to make sure you got healthy livestock. And so working on herd health, whether it's from a nutritional aspect or a disease vaccination or treatment aspect, trying to get good, healthy animals that can definitely protect themselves, especially if we're talking cattle. Cattle can protect themselves from any one of those predators. We just have to make sure they have the right situation to do that. And so, that's definitely step one of the system. Step two of the system is be aware of what you're dealing with. And, if you've got wolves in the area, then, we can work on that. And we can definitely do things like bringing the cows in at night. And, we can work on the life cycles of both livestock and the predators. So knowing when we calve and knowing when the wolves have pups, those are very key times in livestock predation events. So when cattle calve, they're the most vulnerable. As you can imagine, the cows are very fixated on giving birth. It sometimes takes hours for them, and they're in a very vulnerable position. They can't move really from their spot, and they really can't protect themselves. So the big key part of managing predation during calving is make sure you got a herd. Because like humans, when your neighbor's in trouble, most of us are more than willing to help out. We just need to know where they're at and how we can help.
Right.
And so
creating that safety net.
Absolutely. And so when we create a safety net for cattle, we do that by keeping them in a bunch, keeping them in an area where they can see each other. And the fellow cows that aren't calving, they will definitely keep the vulnerable cow that is calving protected. And I've seen that on our own farm time and time again. And so that's a key time, which is calving. A key time in wolf predation is often when the wolves are teaching their pups to hunt. And we don't see wolves tend to prefer beef. Like me or you, we prefer what we eat generally. And for wolves, they like to eat deer and moose and small game. And so that's usually what they stick to. But often we see when wolves have pups is they like to teach their pups how to hunt. And sometimes livestock are an easy prey to hunt. And so when we know when the pups are maturing to learning how to hunt, we can be a little more aware, and we can do some things to manage against, whether it's keeping our herds confined or maybe being a little prepared to be able to push back against the wolves. One thing, I think that's a misconception in the general public is that farmers just like to shoot things indiscriminately. And, that's just not true. Though hunting the wolves is a little bit of a beneficial management practice at times, a lot of farmers understand that you create a vacuum when you shoot a wolf indiscriminately, and what fills that vacuum may be worse than what's there now. So hunting is a tool that farmers use, but it's a last resort because there is downside to it, as I mentioned, with that vacuum.
Yeah, well, you've brought up some great points about almost not just our sense of community, but even the animal's sense of community for that protection. So that's quite amazing. And what's unique about your management practices?
I think another misconception, out there is that farmers just like to use toxicants and poisons to deal with all their problems. And those are tools that are available in other parts of the province, we don't use them at all or very sparingly. And so an example of a time where a toxicant may be necessary is, say, coyote predation with sheep, because no matter how good of a community you build with sheep, they don't have horns, they're not 2,000 pounds, so they may not be able to fight that coyote off. So, those are very, very, very rare instances. In my 15 years here, we've used toxicants once in regarding to a sheep scenario, but mostly some of those practices that I mentioned, and being aware, being vigilant, talking to your neighbors about where they're seeing predators, and making sure your herd's strong and united. All those things will always keep producers away from having to use toxicants, which is our absolute priority, to try to keep those things out of the environment. And we do a good job of that. And like I mentioned before, even though hunting isn't at the top of the list, having producers being prepared. So maybe having a rifle in the tractor, and you don't often, and a lot of times what we do is we tell farmers, you don't have to shoot and kill that wolf. Even shooting at it is a lesson that is excellent, because if wolves understand that there's a risk of dying to try to go get that calf, they'll just go hunt the deer, because nobody's shooting at them when they're hunting deer. So we can actually change the behavior of wolves through just shooting at them and not killing them. And I've seen that be very effective, because now we don't create a vacuum when we remove a wolf, but we teach them a valuable lesson. Don't come here.
That's a great point. It's a great point to bring up. You did mention, how farmers can protect their herds, such as bringing the cattle in at night. Is there anything else regarding that you wanted to reiterate or add?
Yeah, I think top of the list is definitely herd health, and so it keeps it just means that we often have to keep a little closer eye on it, and sometimes that's a challenge, because farmers are putting up hay and doing a lot of other things. So the biggest thing is being vigilant and being aware, and then being able to make a plan with whatever appropriate management practices there are.
Great. And Matt, before we finish off, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about Clearwater?
Well, come on out and visit us. I think Clearwater County is an awesome place, whether you want to come move here and farm or just live here. But if you got a spare weekend, come on out and you'll enjoy what we have here, and you'll enjoy the people that are here as well.
Wonderful. Matt Martinson, Fieldman for Clearwater County, thank you so much for joining our podcast today. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in. Look forward to more podcasts with County Voice, the Alberta Ag Podcast, where we get the goods on events and issues happening in Alberta municipalities.
You've been listening to County Voice, the Alberta Ag Podcast with Gemma Pasquarelli. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, check out the podcast farm on ruralrootscanada.com, featuring ag-based podcasts from across the country. Rural Roots Canada, amplifying Canadian agriculture.